Gotta tell you, I'm feeling a little bit fruity today. I'm not sure why. But anyway, maybe talking about longshore currents will help me. Longshore currents, still talking about erosion, are currents that go horizontally along the beach. That means kind of even with the beach. They don't go straight into shore, they go parallel to the shore. Now, what longshore currents do is they make waves hit the beach at an angle. And when waves hit the beach at an angle, it pushes the sand around. Now, if it happens for 10 minutes, it's not going to push much sand around. But you know that waves seem like they just keep coming and keep coming to the beach. So after many waves hitting the beach, it will eventually move a lot of sand around. And it pushes sand enough to where it makes sandbars and eventually barrier islands, and I'll show you some pictures of those. Here's an example of a sandbar. Now, what happens here, you have the current which has come in here, and it has to have been at an angle. Now, what must have happened from there is as it comes as an angle, it pushes the sand over here. In fact, you can see this area in a lighter color, which is that sand which has been pushed around. And it's been pushed around, and some of it has even gotten on top of the water. In fact, you can see the boats right here. This is a really wide shot. It doesn't look as wide as it really is. But this is actually something called a spit whenever you have a sandbar which is connected on one end. Here's a sandbar that is not a spit. Here's one that's way out. And what happened was you didn't have this here at one point, but because you had the waves coming in at some kind of angle because of the longshore current, it built up sand in places which is not on the beach. So what happens, it kind of pushed it around. That sand ended up right there. So that's helped form that particular sandbar. Now what we have here is an aerial photograph of what's called a barrier island. Now there are barrier islands that are just a little bit off the main shore. Now what has happened is these barrier islands were not here at one point, and you got angles coming in from the waves because of the longshore current. So what eventually happened was, because you had the angles, it pushed sand around, and as the sand eventually got separated from the shore, it built up these sandbars. And what happened is these sandbars got built up and built up and built up, and eventually, I mean, you even have a road on top of this one. You can see the green grass in the background. It became like the land. So this is how barrier islands are formed. Here's another barrier island. In fact, you can see, I'm pretty sure this is a highway which is leading to this particular barrier island right here. Had the formation of it when it was once just a sandbar, but now it has a sign of civilization on it. You can see what probably happened to be even trees that are right here. A couple of more terms. Wind can also form similar features. You know, the waves, the water and the waves push things around, and wind can do the same thing. You can see a couple of terms here, one familiar and one I bet you're not familiar with. The familiar term is a dune. That's a mound of sand built up by wind, and I'm going to show you some examples of those, and then we'll come back to Lois. Here's an example of a dune, and you can see these trees right here. These are trees, and this dune's got to be 800 feet high right here. And what has happened is you've had wind which has blown and just taken the sand and deposited it right here. And you can see the dune right there. Here's another dune, and you can see it just pales the trees that are in front of it. These trees just look like nothing. And you can see it's where the deposit of sand has come from this windy area. Now let's go back to a loess. A loess may be the term you're not as familiar with. A loess is a mound not of sand, but a mound of soil. And you know, it's built up a little bit like a dune because it's a mound as well. Now, loesses are much more common than you might think. Loesses cover up about 10% of the land on Earth and is often very good farmland. Oh, there are many loesses here in the United States. Here's a picture of a loess. You can see we don't have this mound of sand, but we have this mound of earth. And it's just happened that wind has, throughout the years, blown this big mound of topsoil right here. And you can see it's even got grass growing on top right here. Here's another example of a loess right there. It's just this huge chunk of topsoil. And you can imagine that since it was once sediment, that it is pretty good farmland. Now let's talk about glaciers. We've mentioned glaciers a couple of videos back. Glaciers are formed when the weight of unmelted snow presses the snow on the bottom and forms ice. Because it's all water in the first place, the snow can be packed in so much that it turns out to be ice. Now, glaciers on mountains break off these chunks of rock and soil as they slide down the mountain. And we'll show you a couple of pictures here in just a second. There are two kinds of glaciers. There are these alpine glaciers. They're the ones that are on the mountains. There's the ones that we're going to be talking about as far as erosion goes. Now, there happen to be continental glaciers too. They cover huge tracts of land, like Greenland has a glacier on top of it. Antarctica is a glacier on top of it. But that we're not, even though if that were to move, it'd cause incredible amount of erosion. What actually moves more in our time would be alpine glaciers. Here's an alpine glacier. And what you can see is here this big, huge chunk of ice which has been packed down snow, which has been traveling down this mountain. You can see the lowest part has been chiseled out. The lowest part of the mountain has been chiseled out by this glacier. Just an enormous amount of sediment can be taken by glaciers. And here's another one. This is not very good photography, but you can, or it's far off photography. You can see this glacier right here, which has just, the path has been worn down. I mean, you have this mountain right here. You have this mountain right here. When the glaciers formed however many years ago and started sliding down, you can see it just wore this huge groove in the mountain. This is not just a little bit of dust a glacier takes with it. It takes a lot of a mountain off with it. Glaciers move large amounts of sediment and redeposit the sediment as the ice slides. I have a couple more terms here. We have the term till and moraine. Till is the name for this sediment that the glacier redeposits. I mean, it has this rock that is coming from the mountain, this rock and this soil, and it has to deposit it somewhere. And where it deposits, that's the till is what it deposits. And when you have a mound of till, it's called a moraine. Let's take a look at one example here. In fact, yeah, we do have one example here. Look here. We have this mountain which has been divided. You can tell what's happened. You've had a glacier or more than one glacier which has come down through here. But look at this ridge right here. And look at this ridge right here. These are moraines. This is where that glacier has taken the sediments and put it. These are mounds of till. The moraine is a mound of till. So that's exactly what has happened here. It's kind of like like God took his finger and just pulled the mountain down through here and ended up having these moraine, these mounds of till right here. And you can see there's even a lake that formed where glaciers ended up stopping and melting right there. Speaking of lakes, kettle lakes are formed from receding glaciers. Now we're talking more in this case about continental glaciers. Scientists think that we had a glacier that covered a lot of Canada and North America at one point, and whenever those glaciers melted, they left a lot of lakes, and the United States Great Lakes are supposed to be kettle lakes. Now, these kettle lakes kind of look all the same. They look like these little potholes. If you see here, you have this little hole that's filled up with water, and this hole that's filled up with water, and this hole that's filled up with water, and it looks like there's some other holes that are filled up with water. This is probably somewhere in Minnesota or Canada. And what has happened is at one point there was a glacier on top here, but when the glacier started receding, we had these holes that were left, and some of the ice just melted. And you have these kettle lakes here.